Hey, what's up, dudes? It's me, Mr. Airon here, the cool dude here, and welcome back to another history lesson. And today's in my second channel. So in today's video, we're gonna be learning you guys all about the American Revolutionary War. So before I get into this video, I would just the first thing is if you want to guys see one more content like this, then be sure to hit the like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to comment and turn on the bell notifications. And the second thing I wanted to also want to let you know is that I'll be dividing this presentation into parts. So because this is gonna be like the really longest presentation that I've actually created here on my Google Slides. So yeah, but in today's video, what I'm gonna be discussing about guys is about the American Revolution, is including the chapters like what were the causes or the start of the American Revolutionary War, and like basically about taxation without representation, and also about Paul Revere's Midnight Rides and the lead to war, and also about things like the first Second Continental Congress, the Declaration of Independence, and also the parts of videos of the other like the including battles like the surrender of Yorktown. So, but I'm gonna be in this first part. I'm gonna be going all the way here to the Declaration of Independence for at the end for the first part of my video. So, and if you guys are excited, please, babies, again, just hit the like and subscribe, and let's get things to it. Alright, so to give you guys a bit of a background, so basically after the French and Indian War between, or otherwise known as the 7 Years' War, also fought in Europe and India, and in France in 1763, that Britain has a lot of financial debt, that because of the war was basically super expensive, that they decided to paying taxes to the British colonies and introducing the Sugar and the Stamp Acts, which that they were given no presentation in representation in the British Parliament. This made the peasants angry, and they're crying taxation without any representation. That because they were not represented in the British Parliament, that they are forced to pay a lot of taxes without any representing in the British government. That protests had been violent against the British, and that on March 5th of 1770, that a large angry crowd in Boston were calling with the withdrawal of British troops, that they were throwing snowballs and rocks and oyster shells at the British, that the British had panicked, and then they started opening fire, and that 5 civilians were killed into what is known as the Boston Massacre. And it was a violent and brutal crime that was committed against the British, and that the anger continued to grow, and that they rely on mostly on their taxes on tea, in which on December 16th, 1770, a group of Americans known as the Sons of Liberty were dressed up as like basically Native Americans that were led by men like Samuel Adams, and that were basically that they dressed up Native Americans, and they were on a British ship, and that they went into the Boston Harbor and dumped all the British tea. The British would close this, and that they were decided, and they punished Massachusetts for vengeance, and that the British closed off all assemblies and sent in more British troops, and Boston was under the direct control of Great Britain. And they also introduced a lot more other taxes, such as like the Townshend Acts, which are basically that are like taxes on like that basically like glass, tea, leather, and playing cards. And they also introduced like the Intolerable or the Quartering Acts, which basically also allowed like British soldiers to basically to house them into many of people's homes, and many delegates were quartered in many of the colonies' homes. That many delegates met in Philadelphia. That in the First Continental Congress, they had to adopt the Articles of Association that boycotts the British goods, and drafted a petition against King George the Third, and declared that the colonists should have some rights as Englishmen. Approved the statesmen for the people of Great Britain. The North American colonies have the Quebec, and to talk about the concerns and complaints of, and talk about the British controlling them, what to do with the British controlling the American colonies.
The Boston Tea Party.
All right, let's go move on. So So this is a painting, a drawing of like that happened with the Boston Massacre. That was actually painted by Paul Revere. That he actually saw the occurrence and the witnessed the of the civilians getting killed by the British into during the Boston Massacre. And this is also another photo of the Sons of Liberties who are dressed up as Native Americans. That they dropped over like 342 tons of British tea, dumped them all the way into the to the Boston Harbor. And so, okay, so now here we would talk about Paul Revere's Midnight Rides. So if you don't know, Paul Revere, he was known for basically his midnight ride to warn basically all the American colonies that the British or that the approaching British troops on April 18th of 1775, that a ride immortalized in Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride. This has played a crucial role in alerting the militia before the battles of Lexington and Concord, which has marked the start of the American Revolutionary War. Because, like, for Paul Revere, like, for one, that basically he was not, like, basically alarming only all the, like, basically only around the towns of Boston, because that would get him captured by the British. This is more of like basically kind of like a rescue plan, and basically and also like there was also another Sons of Liberty known as William Dawes, who was another Sons of Liberty who started basically Paul Revere's Midnight Ride before, like, when the Revere came in, and they both went together warned the people at Lexington, until these two were basically detained and captured by British soldiers and thrown in jail. Thus, we then later see here
Today,
to meet another Son of Liberty known as Samuel Prescott, who he boycotted the night of April 18th and 19th of 1775, and he was known as Samuel Prescott, but his role was a message to warn the people at Concord, so that way that basically to warn men like John Hancock that the warn that the British are coming, and that they then later organized like the minute militiamen to basically to prepare for fight against the British troops that are heading to the village, to use crucial final hours before the opening of the American Revolution. All right, so now here we are. So chapter 1. So let's talk about the battles of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill. So on Lexington Concord on April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord were the first military engagements of the American Revolutionary War, because when the militiamen and the British were basically meeting up with each other, they were shouting at each other and basically fighting over until this happened when a shot had been heard. Then no one knows exactly who actually fired first, but that when it became known as the shots that are heard around the world. And the reason why it's basically called like that is because because they were later engulf all the other revolutions that are happening later on in history around the world, which includes like basically the French Revolution, which I have a video that I have on the tag other than this video, or in the links in the description. And also like the three Russian revolutions and the scientific revolution and so on. But this also then later started the American Revolution, and the other battles that took place on April 19th of 1775 in Massachusetts, that the the militia had won the battles, which led to the increase of support for the anti-British cause. And also the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was launched on April 19th of 1775. That the Bunker Hill was fought between the British and the colonists. It was one of the most bloodiest battles, because like the British had friars went to charge until they were brutally pushed back by a few times by the American colonies led by General Warren, who basically fought ruthlessly against the British until all the colonists had lost all of their ammunition, and then they had to retreat. Plus, General Warren was also basically one who was killed during the Battle of Bunker Hill. But it also demonstrated the ability of American colonists to stand against against the well-trained British Army. And so here we have the American Revolutions or disadvantages, and there's the American Revolution. And so here we're going to talk about also the capture of Fort Ticonderoga. So basically, on May 1775, a Union general named Benedict Arnold was sent to capture Fort Ticonderoga that contains guns and ammunition. That when he went up there, he met up with his Ethan Allen and his group called the Green Mountain Boys, who had exactly the same plan. And so they decided that they both basically worked together, and so together they crossed the lake of the Champlain from the Vermont of the colonists, and they silently renewed on the fort. That the dead of night of the colonists stormed the fort, and the surprise attack against through the British from a small garrison that were waiting for the start of the American Revolution. But the capture of Fort Ticonderoga was a symbol of the American strength and pride and their victory, and it was able to the American garrison strengthen their fort's fences, and also that they were now able to get all the guns and ammunition, which was then brought about by Henry Knox, that basically gives all the guns and ammunition to General George Washington. That the British, after the battles of Lexington and Concord and Bunker, and that were really in defeat, that the British had to be retreated all the way back to Boston. So Henry Knox had to basically give all the guns and ammunition to George Washington to set up their cannons and fortifications all around the British control over to get out of to Boston. And so let's talk about the invasion of Canada, which occurred around 1775, and there was given to generals like Benedict Arnold. There was a goal to capture the Quebec City to gain support from French Canadians in the invasion that ended in the defeat for the Americans on December the 31st of 1775. A dual purpose was impending: possible strikes from the colonists, and they're encouraging the Canadians to support the rebellion. Why do you guys think the Americans lost the battle? But that resulted in a humiliating defeat to try to capture Canada, not because of basically of the fierce resistance against the many of the British, but also that the Americans face of heavy terrain and heavy snow here, and also the constant fort range of gunfire that the British had to basically retreat. They had to retreat all the way back to the colonists and colonies, and that the most French and Canadians viewed the fighting as the British as fighting against the former colonies. That the Americans abused the citizenry and mocked their religion, and that the American troops were green and ill-disciplined here. And in chapter 4, here's the siege of Boston, which is the opening phase of the war. In the siege, the American Patriot militia was led by a new installed Continental Army in the commander of George Washington to prevent the British Army, which was led by a garrison in Boston, from moving by land. And that the British were even threatened, that they realized that they didn't know where the cannons that the fortifications how well armed the Americans have, and there were desperate in the British, and that eventually they then had to basically retreated away from Boston, and until when the Americans also fired cannons. Okay, so now here's the First and Second Continental Congress. So let's talk about the First Continental Congress. So the First Continental Congress was a meeting of delegates from 12 and of the 13 colonies. Many of the delegates from the 13 colonies, but within the colonies met in 1774 and convened the Philadelphia to address the escalating tensions with Great Britain, particularly regarding the intolerable acts and the formula of the unified colonial response. And Congress has a plan to boycott of the British trade, and to publish the address to the colonies and to the mother country, and send also a petition, which is later become known as the Olive-Branch-Petition, to send in all of their grievances, and their basically to oppose any of the taxes that was from the Great Britain, and they also to make a lot of good terms with the British king of King George III. But the First Continental Congress passed and signed the Continental Association and its declaration and resolves. And whereas the Second Continental Congress was a gathering of delegates from the 13 American colonies that was convened in later the following year in 1775, that shortly after the battles of Lexington and Concord, and to coordinate the colony's resistance against the British rule during the American Revolutionary War, ultimately leading to the adoption of the Declaration of Independence and the establishment of the United States of America as an independent nation. The Second Continental Congress was eventually disbanded on March 1st of 1781. And so here I'm going to be talking about. So here are the pictures. There's a picture on the right that is the King George. That's where King George the Third, where he was also king by the time also the American Revolution, and also prior to that when he also was stolen by the. But it's a lot of taxes to gain money from the American colonies. So it's also led by the British Prime Minister of Lord North. And over here on the left is the Olive-Branch petition that I mentioned before, to give all their grievances and to oppose any of the taxes giving in to the king, and also to make a lot of good terms, and also all their grievances. So what is the Olive-Petition branch? The Olive-Petition branch, which was adopted by the Second Continental Congress, was what happened on July 5th of 1775, and it was a final attempt to avoid war with Great Britain and affirmed that American loyalty to the British Crown while pleading to reconciliation with King George III. Despite its efforts, the petition was rejected, and the colonists were officially declared to be in a rebellion, because like when they tried to send in the Olive-Branch-Petition, like basically just said rescind and reconcile with the King George III. Basically, King George III basically rejected this, and he then basically saw this like basically a rebellion as basically kind of like basically as an act of of rebellion, and that they're now both at the stage of war. All right, and so here are the two videos of the King George's III's point of view of the Olive-Branch branch, and this other video on the right is like the more like the founding fathers, the colonial delegates of the reviews over like the of the Olive-Branch petition, and this one's from like the Madness of King George, whereas this is from the John Adams series, which I'll put those videos in the description below, as well as you can also basically check out the Olive-Branch-Petition branch in the links in this website at the Olive-Branch-Petition / First Amendment Museum.org, which I'll put a link in the description down below. All right. So here's so finally here is the Declaration of Independence. So because like basically before the Declaration of Independence was in 1776, that basically like the idea of like breaking free away from the king, it was like basically considered both like ideally revolutionary, but it's also more considerably controversial, because not all the American colonists like wanted to declare their own independence from the British Crown, because basically some had thought basically it would create a lot of chaos and like basically disunity, and like basically a lot of destructive and lead to a lot of destruction and just a lot of disorder and everything. So but basically a man that was going by the name of Thomas Paine, who went to the American colonies, in 1775 and 1776 was advocating for basically for independence from Great Britain to the people in the 13 colonies, because Thomas Paine, he was supported the ideas of independence, but also like basically like he was also like basically against the ideas of the taxes like of that was initiated from King George III. And the Declaration of Independence it happens in July 4th of 1776, where Thomas Jefferson had wrote down the Declaration of Independence, and it was drafted by also with John Adams and Benjamin Franklin until it was adopted by the Continental System, which meant that the 13 colonies had to announce their separation of Great Britain, and they all gave it into the and they all gave it a vote into the Declaration of Independence. But there is something that you might not know. First, that the Declaration of Independence, the reason why it was mostly for Jefferson to like write down the Declaration of Independence was because like basically they needed like basically a delegate that was basically that comes from all the way from Virginia, and like basically he has like Jefferson also has like basically a better handwriting than like say men like John Adams. And so, like, but like, basically, there's some also in the Declaration of Independence that you might know that basically one, it becomes more ideological because of like basically that it states that we hold these truths to be a lot more self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their leader with a certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And but the selfish part of the Declaration of Independence is that like men like Thomas Jefferson had basically held over, still had like did not were not that not all the men like including the African Americans there were still being and enslaved, that they're still living in slavery during around this time, and men like Jefferson had held over 300 slaves during around this time, and they were not given by this point that they were not given the rights and the freedoms during around this time. And also like Jefferson deserves to get all the credit, but it was also led by John Adams and Benjamin Franklin that I mentioned, and as well as Roger Sherman. And so basically, and like when it was approved in the Second Continental Congress, the Continental Congress also made with Jefferson basically with the Declaration to make also some made a lot of like basically minor changes to the Declaration of Independence, and also like threw out like a big deletion at the document. And one like for one moment, like Benjamin Franklin disagreed with Jefferson that he hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, as he suggested that to hold these truths to be more quote unquote self-evident. All
The
right, and
year?
now let's go on. So here is the painting of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and other men who were basically held in the Continental Congress, and basically they were here to reprove of the Declaration of Independence in the Second Continental Congress from Great Britain. All right, so here's Thomas Jefferson's like the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and it said that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men to derive in just the powers from the consent of the governed, that whether they would be either destructive or anything, and it's all the right for their people to abolish and institute new governments. And so here is the document of the release of the document of the Declaration of Independence that is written by the Jefferson and the other founders. Oh, oops. What? Hold on. Oopsies. And so the Declaration of Independence, so here I'm going to be talking about the principles of what the purpose of the Declaration of Independence. So, and this writing, I think, is why they are writing the document made the board of the political and the philosophical reasons for separating. Like this, if you guys didn't know, also that the Declaration of Independence is also inspired or influenced by like many philosophers such as like John Locke, Rousseau, and like Voltaire and Montesquieu, that basically like it inspires them. Like for John Locke, it inspires like the terms such as like giving them people life, liberty, and like and property, and as well as also basically like the Voltaire and Montesquieu, the education, and also like they give out religious toleration, and also the separation, and that by then, like the separation or the break from the king, and so like the intent of the statement or values of the rights of individuals and the purpose of the government is it like visionary or pragmatic here, and also with the list of grievances is it's a list of unjust things that King George III did, and the statement of independence. This state has that they are breaking away from Great Britain and that they have exhausted every effort to make the Union work, and only about signed by 56 people, which are by then like the colonial delegates, and the main author again was Thomas Jefferson. And so here we have the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is right by James Jason George Mason, who was adopted in June of 1776, that wrote that all men have the right of life, health, and happiness, possession, which inspired the Virginia Declaration of Rights in June 12th of 1776, as life and liberty, which means the acquiring and possessing the property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. So here's a picture of the founder. He's George Mason, who is often be called the nickname of the forgotten founding fathers, because many of you guys keep learning in like school founding fathers like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, or John Hancock, or basically others like John Dickinson, and then so on and so forth. And this is also a paper of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And so here, the Virginia Declaration of Rights that was drafted by George Mason and adopted in June of 1776. So the Declaration of Rights was drafted in 1776 with the proclaim of the emancipation of the men, including the right to reform or abolish the inadequate government, in which influenced a number of later documents, including the United States Declaration of Independence, and later also in the United States Bill of Rights, which was later added into the U.S. Constitution in 1791, just like way after the American Revolutionary War. And so basically, this is basically the good point to stop here. So basically, there's still a lot of I have still a lot of presentations here, and that's still that I added a lot of slides, and then that's all. My slides are basically the whole is a total of 69, so I ended up around like on 24. So this is where I'm personally gonna stop. But again, I will be dividing this into two parts. So I will keep making more videos like this. But if you guys still enjoyed it, and I hope you guys learned something, and if you guys still want to see more world history content like this, then what are you waiting for? Please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're new. Don't forget to comment and turn on that bell notifications. That way you get voted by every video that I'll be posting in this second channel. And yeah, so I'll see, and I guess I'll just see you guys in my next video. So yeah, Mr. Aaron's out. Peace.